The primary purpose of Innovative AAC Solutions, the podcast, is to educate and inform. The views expressed during all episodes are solely those of the individuals involved and do not constitute educational or medical advice. They are not necessarily the views of Special School District of St. Louis County. Welcome back, guys, to another episode of Innovative AAC Solutions. I'm your host, Laura Hayes. Can't wait to share this episode with you. Really had some fun with this interviewee, and I am going to jump pretty much right into it after I tell you our joke because we're about to go on break. I hope everyone has an amazing break. I hope you get lots of rest and relaxation. But we can't leave without leaving you with a good joke to tell everyone you meet. And that is just if we think about the alphabet, somebody once asked me what the ninth letter was. Somebody once asked me what the ninth letter of the alphabet was. I took a shot in the dark. It was a total guess, but I was right. I was right. I was right. So there's your joke to take with you. See how long it takes the other person to get it. And think about making it accessible for them. Just like we make literacy accessible for everybody that we talk to, everybody that we teach, everybody that communicates. On that note, we're going to jump into an interview with Katherine Dally, who is amazing at this specific topic. I'll let her introduce herself, tell you all her great ideas. There's some new gems here. Be sure not to miss it. Welcome back, everybody, to Innovative AAC Solutions, the podcast. I am here today with Katherine Dally and Daly. Oh my God, how do I not know?
Dally, it's fine.
Dally.
Dally, it's fine.
I said it, and then I was like, that's not right. Okay, Katherine Dally, and we go back a bit. You also may know her as AAC for All on Instagram, and just kind of a wealth of knowledge when it comes to accessible materials, thinking about complex bodies, thinking about preschool learners all the way up to high school learners, and just wonderful ideas to truly give access for AAC for all. So that's what we're going to talk about today. But I want everybody, I know you pretty well, but I want everyone else to know you really well by the end of this episode. So can you give the listeners a little bit about you, a little bit of your background and how you are where you are?
Yeah, so I am a speech language pathologist by trade. It's my 11th year practicing, and I started my AAC career, interestingly enough, with adults in an ALS clinic. So they were starting an ALS clinic at our hospital, and they said, you're going to be the speech therapist on the ALS clinic. I had the swallowing stuff down, but needed just to learn from kind of from the top down. I think a lot of times people start with touch access, but I started with eye gaze and switch and head mouse. And I think that's where my, my love and passion for alternative access came from. I bled into the children's hospital at that point when they found out somebody was doing AAC. And then I ended up working for a dedicated speech device company for 2 years. So I got to travel and meet all types of speech language pathologists in different settings. Our family grew unexpectedly again. So I ended up settling down in the schools, working at an educational service center. We have about 36 different districts that we support in an amazing loan closet. So that's kind of where I've settled over the past 5 years, focusing a lot with preschool as well as the alternative access piece from preschool up into high school. So we're in Cincinnati, Ohio, not too far from St. Louis. And I'm actually hoping to get down there this summer to play on some grass tennis courts. So
it's going to be great. It's going to be great. Us Midwest girls got to stick together. And I think it's so funny. I always tell people, never say never, right? Like your journey could take you so many places, and you're such a good example of that. And I also think that it makes a lot of sense when we talk about access that a lot of people that are really, I would call them kind of gurus in the world of AAC and access are people that have dove into both adults and pediatrics, because it's kind of hard. Would you agree to get a lot of training in pediatric alternative access courses?
Yeah, I think so. And one thing that I really recognized when I was a young speech therapist working with adults, even, is like what is out there? Like from the ground up, I thought it was touch access and eye gaze access. Like what is in between and what technology is out there? What's accessible to me on the iPad nowadays? Those types of things. So I just feel that's what I hear a lot from clinicians, even my own area. Like I just don't know what I don't know with alternative access.
Yeah. Yeah. Which we could do so much. I mean, we could do an entire day on that. But today's episode is really diving into the topic of accessible literacy for someone who might be using alternative access. So maybe let's go over just what does that term accessible literacy mean to you, and what do you think would be a takeaway?
Yeah, so I think accessible literacy is all about working towards the strengths of our student. Also looking at a learner-centered approach. So what do they want to be reading about? And so I think it could mean a wide variety of things. Maybe it's a student with visual impairments or hearing impairments. Maybe it's a student who has physical access challenges of the upper, body, and they need help turning pages, or they need something read out loud to them, or they need to turn the page through hitting a switch or read the book with eye gaze. So I think it just is really focusing on what movements the student has and working towards the strengths to give them a very interactive reading experience.
Yep. And just to add on to that, just removing those barriers, any barriers that might be in place that would prevent them from having that experience, and thinking about it in a lot of different ways of how to remove any barriers that could exist.
Yeah.
Um,
I think one thing too that I talk about is when I'm working in the I work in a autistic classroom for preschoolers. Like those students can get up and run away from me if they're not interested, if they're not ready to read, if they want to go play. But for a lot of these students with complex physical access challenges, and maybe they're wheelchair bound or in, different seating, they can't get up and leave to tell me it's not something they're enjoying, or I don't want them to be passive learners either. So what am I doing to really like beef up that experience too, and making reading actively engaging for them?
yeah, so that was my next question. What does active
Oh,
participation look like? No, what does it truly look like? I think if we have a
yeah.
new teacher or new staff coming in going, okay, I would just think I would just read them the book, and they can respond to those questions and however they would after. So what does active participation look like in the classroom?
Yeah, so I think it can look very different for a lot of students depending on their physical strengths and needs. But I'm talking about as simple as letting a student turn the page, pointing to the words, choosing from two different books, standing up and acting out the book during circle time for students, clapping out syllables, having the core word of the week. And every time we hear the core word of the week, we stand up and scream or whatever it might be. With physical access challenges, it's can we make a lift the flat book more accessible for students? For eye gaze, do we have a board where they can comment if they liked it, if they didn't like it, if they want you to read in a loud voice, the silly voice? So I don't think active engagement means, I think active engagement is a part of movement, but movement can look so different for different students with their needs. I also did this course over at ATIA, and it talked about the benefits of movement, and specifically movement in reading. And a lot of times we don't think to pair movement with reading. We think about movement in art and movement in gym. But movement and reading, they talked about that when the area of our brains for learning and movement are actually the same, and when they're activated, active engagement happens and learning increases by 90%. So there's just a lot of benefit of movement throughout all of learning, throughout an entire student's career.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of like when language moves, when we move, language moves. So it makes total
Yeah.
sense that when we move, literacy can move too. We can move that needle through movement. I would love if you still have that resource or can recall the author of that ETIA presentation.
Yeah.
I know we can't share the actual presentation out, but I'm wondering if we can share the presenters or any links that they shared as a adjacent resource to this episode, because I think a lot of people out there would be
Yeah.
excited.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah. I think it talks a lot about the neuroscience of reading and movement. And so, yeah, I'd be happy to share that with you.
Perfect. And so then you give so many concrete examples. I know someone out there who's listening might think to themselves, well, what is that? Give me an example. Like, what does that actually look like, Mary Catherine? But you give so many examples on your Instagram, whether it be like a page fluffer or how we can make a tactile book. Maybe can you just add on, let's say, we've got St. Patrick's Day coming up, right?
Yeah.
What are just 2 or 3 things that you have done this month for some of your to make literacy accessible?
Yeah, so just in the past, what I've done actually, St. Patrick's Day is very much about like tricks and playing tricks in one another and like leprechauns leaving messes. So one thing we did for students is we might read a book like How to Catch a Leprechaun. I actually just shared this on my stories this morning. And you could make an eye gaze board for how do you want to catch him? Should we dye the toilet green? Or I think that's what the leprechaun does. Or should we put out gold coins? And then, a student using eye gaze might comment based on the choices that were in the book. And then you can have the students that have the physical mobility set up the trap and then have them comment. Should we make it bigger or smaller or whatever it might be? Another thing we've done before is just an extension activity of what are tricks and having a whoopee cushion for an older student. And now the student can via eye gaze say, I want you to blow it up. I want you to sit down. I want this student to do it or that type of student. So anything that is an extension activity of reading and bringing it into real life, I think is another important perspective for comprehension.
Oh, I love that so much. I was gonna add on to that too, the catch a leprechaun. One idea that
Mhm.
I just heard about that thought was so good was having shamrocks around and then showing them to whoever you are. They can be blank, but then letting them know, oh, you can't see what's on here. I can see what's on here. It must be invisible just to me. And then giving those clues around it so that you can shift it to however you need to, shift the language level, shift whatever. So it's magic because they can't necessarily read what's on there, but you can as the adult. I thought that was genius.
That's cute.
Yeah.
Well, and then just another thing in preschool, during times of stories, we just hand out fidgets.
Mm.
And so why can't we just pass out shamrocks or pass out, if it's safe, gold coins or gold coins in a jar so students can shake them when we're reading about a leprechaun? So again, it doesn't have to be always like communication linked or tied. I mean, that is important. It could also be sensory linked and tied through learning.
Yeah. And if you're giving out gold coins, why not just like quickly write on there with a little Sharpie and give some alternative access to letters, right? Like we can get real
Mm,
creative real quickly on the fly. It doesn't have to be, I kind of, one thing that I've always taken from you is that it doesn't have to be elaborate. Like you can work with what you already have, be flexible, and kind of just go with the flow. I think that you do such a nice job with that on your ideas. Not to plug your ideas too much, but I just think that you're really creative, and I think that we need more creativity when we're thinking about complex bodies. Um,
yeah.
so so speaking of complex bodies, what might be some accommodations that we might consider when we're thinking about access to literacy? We've talked a little bit about it, like adding movement, individualized
Mhm.
customizations. Anything else you can think of?
I think just looking at their access method and then finding out what tools are out there. So if we're looking at switch access, can we use something like Boardmaker Student Center with core word books? Can we use or create a page set that they can scan through and then read the book out loud to them? Or, what resources like Tar Heel Reader are out there? Same with head pointing. One really cool thing that you can do is download a free software camera mouse. And in PowerPoint, you can link pages to one another. So you can
Hmm.
create your own movable book via head pointing for very low cost. And then the same for eye gaze, like what systems or software is out there for eye gaze if we already talked about the low tech, high tech. In some you do have to pay for, but some have free trials, and just digging a little bit more into what capabilities are out there for not only the low tech, but the high tech.
And that just made me think of the example you just gave using Canva and customizations, taking a picture within, whether it be the iPad
Oh, yeah.
or the or your, again, if you have permission, if you're a parent listening, like your phone of the AAC user, and then putting that into the book itself through sharing through Canva, and Canva is a free resource if you're an educator. Love
Yeah.
it. I
And
love it.
there's just not a lot of one thing I found out this past week when doing a little bit of research is there's not a lot out there on personalized books and the benefits for students. I think because printing personalized books has been so new over the past 20 years. But there was a really nice study with preschoolers. They found
Mm.
that personalized books increase the rate the vocabulary is learned, as well as active engagement, of course, like we've been talking about, as well as when parents read personalized books with preschoolers, they had overall increased positive emotions, smiling, laughing. And I think anytime, like that's always my goal with the early years, is just having really enjoyable shared reading experiences that want to make them a lifelong reader.
Yeah. And one more thing to add is thinking about how easy that can be to adapt for an older student
Yeah.
who might be an emergent reader still. It can be really powerful for them too. So that's one of those ageless things that you can think about having in your toolbox.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great idea.
What about challenges or, risks or pitfalls you might have seen through the years when it comes to trying to make literacy accessible for someone with a complex body?
Oh, goodness.
You mentioned
So,
I hear the passive part, right? Just that like, well,
yeah.
they'll just sit there and they'll take it in, and that is definitely something we see here.
I think last year I had a user who had visual impairments, so I would make a lot of tactile overlays in books and such for them, which can take a lot of time. You have to create the book, simplify the text, laminate tactile overlays, fix it if they rip off. And so sometimes I would feel really disappointed when they wouldn't like the book. But I have to realize that like that's a communication opportunity to say I didn't like it, or I didn't, whatever. It was too bumpy. It was rough, so I think sometimes I put a lot of time in creating things for students, thinking it's going to be like this knock it out of the ballpark experience for them. And it's not. And that's, my own fault. But I think it goes back to use what you have. So do you have a really simple picture book already, like a spot book that you can add tactile overlays to? Or can you take a book like Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs and just cut out some of the characters and put them on a blank background to make them a little bit more simple? So I think it's nice to have the personalized, books and items, but you don't always have to do that because, you know, and if one student doesn't like it, you will eventually have a student that does. You just have to save it. So I think that's definitely a pitfall, is spending a lot of time and making things like, perfect and creative and tailored. And there's probably things around the classroom that you can try to use.
Oh, that is a good one. Yep. Um, so let's see, we've talked about Tar Heel Reader. We talked about a good amount of resources so far.
Yeah.
Are there any other resources that you have found really helpful when you think about, tapping into, we mentioned Canva.
Mhm.
We've mentioned a few, but anything else you can think of?
So I also like for older students, I don't want to mispronounce it, Pixabay,
Mhm.
Pixabay, because they have like mini videos you can download. So if you're talking about introducing new vocabulary, like astronaut, the astronaut can be pulled up on the screen and be walking across the moon, or they have
Mm.
sound effects that you can access for free, which are nice just to throw into Google Slides or Google PowerPoint. I actually have a PowerPoint open right now. I'm teaching a similar class, so I'm going to check out to see if there's anything else. Yeah, I like Canva for like the kind of the green screen or that AI generator. So if you have a student who has like a favorite character or really likes um, raccoons, you could put raccoon riding on a school bus and it will automatically create a personalized video or picture for you. I'm trying to see if there's any other ones I like.
And that could be
One thing
really
I
good as like a carryover writing task too, right? Like especially if you're doing like
Yeah.
nonsensical things and trying to get a reaction, like how hilarious is it of a raccoon riding on a scooter, and it's novelty, right? Like Lauren Enders talks a lot about like bringing language in with novelty, and that, but you can still make it consistent. So And or even
Yeah.
like if you did like an independent writing activity where they got to generate like what you were going to search
Oh,
for
that'd be fun.
and what
Yeah.
comes up, like, whoo, that would be some flexible on the fly learning.
Yeah. And even if your student isn't able to necessarily like write out all the words, I mean, you could use alternative pencil, but then you could give them a list that they could pick from. Like, do you want
Love
to
it.
through partner assisted scanning? So I think trying to think if there's anything else that I used. Oh yeah. So I didn't realize that it's a free app. It's called Sounding Board. I'm sure a lot of you guys use it just in general for some communication boards on the fly, but it also has scanning built in. So this morning I just took pictures of pages and then it could scan through and then a student could select which page of the book they wanted to read or talk about. So I didn't realize that was a free resource.
Love it.
Um, so yeah, also working with your OT and PT for positioning as well as vision and line readers and highlighting and what type of text you should be using. I think that's another really important piece.
Yeah, and I love the fact that you touched on partner assisted scanning because I think
Mm,
sometimes people think like, well, they have to be in a specific position or they have to be just right, be pulled up to the C table to participate in shared reading or shared writing activities. And
yeah.
that is a nice way to kind of tag on if they are needing a break or if they're over on the mat, if they're in a stand or if they're in a wherever they might be positioning wise, that can make it a little more accessible.
Yeah. And I think one thing that when we presented together before, we talk about that reading access doesn't have to be the same as communication access. So if it's switch access for reading, that's fine if communication is high tech eye gaze or whatever it might be. It's just whatever is accessible to them and building on their strengths in the moment.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that can help, we just did this for another student, but thinking through an environmental inventory of what Yoder and Stegler talk about this in 2004. It may even be updated, but thinking through like what the activity looks like. So is it a independent writing activity? Okay, well, where are they at during that activity? And then what AT am I going to tackle? What do I already in place, or what are some barriers to that? And then what strategies are we going to use? So sometimes something as simple as like a quick table
Yeah.
thinking that through the environment could be helpful.
I love that because if your block center is right next to your reading center, number one, you're going to be having a lot of visual attention towards a different area and it's going to be loud. So if you have a student with a visual impairment who really uses their hearing, you've just kind of set up an environment or, situation to where you're going to be impacting their potential ability to listen and attend and engage.
And I feel like maybe we've jumped over it a couple of times, but we keep talking about a visual impairment. So there's definitely
Mm,
some accommodations you can think about when it comes to, in addition to tapping into like a VI support
oh,
personnel.
TBI. Yeah.
Yeah. Thinking through, do we need to come at this from adjusting the symbol set or looking at adding tactile supports or looking at adding auditory supports? So there's many different resources, but I think that's a good uh thing to think about when we're talking about these students.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think never discount the fact of just sitting down and reading a book like a book is usually read or what we're used to a book being read with a student. Like never devalue that. Don't always feel like you have to have this like big show and fireworks. Like that shared reading experience and that connection is so important as well. So
Yeah, I would say put that at the top of the list, right? Sometimes we put the materials. I always, we go in and we hear people saying like, okay, well, I need all my materials just right. And then if something goes wrong, then they're like, oh, it's a wash today. But like, no, the important part is they're getting that reading opportunity. You're having that shared connection. You're building that intrinsic and
yeah,
motivation to be a reader. Yeah, I love that.
yep, I agree.
Okay, Mary Catherine, we could both talk all day. But I can't let you go without asking you the question I ask everyone that jumps on the podcast
Oh,
with us, which is, what is your favorite AAC moment to date? If it's bonus points if you say something related to literacy or alternative access, but not required.
mm, I did look at your questions, but I guess I didn't look all the way at the bottom. Um, oh my gosh. I Oh, I don't know. My favorite AAC moment.
Or one that jumps out at you?
Hmm.
Other than
I mean,
presenting with me.
of course. And you know, I think I should say AAC is a speech and language pathologist, but I think some of my favorite moments are accessible play and the communication that comes with them. Whether it is, hitting, the switch has been activated and now there's a big blow up of Yoda coming out of the table, or just giving access to an oven for, a play, pretend oven or grill for a student who really likes to cook. And now we're using blocks as the corn on the cob and we're grilling. I really treasure and value those moments because I know how important play is to students. So
Well,
I would say those are
I
my
gotta
favorite moments.
and I gotta plug you for a second again because I think is it a carnival? It is what is it that you guys? It's the winter
Oh,
workshop.
adapted toy Wonderland.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
So, I mean, I can only imagine. I wish I was a fly on the wall when you do that. So, Mary Catherine, you kind of spearhead it, don't you? I'm not sure if your
Mhm.
husband wants to have like an entire separate she shed for this, but you spearhead adapting toys that are just off the market toys that you can find, and you have some great resources, and we can always link those here, but you have some really great resources on how you can adapt that for low cost. And then how you set up that Wonderland each year. And if I was a parent walking in with my child or my teen coming into that and picking something, I think would be really magical.
Yeah. Well, and something we've started to do this year is like, great, it's a Switch toy. Like, how can we be more versatile with the Switch toys? So we've been really trying to pair books with the Switch toys. So if it's the chicken that lays an egg, it's like, okay, we can read like the sky is falling. Oh, I don't know these. And then like there's a Principal Tate is running late. I think that's a chicken book. So we put multiple books at different reading levels in with the Switch toy. So it might give teachers that aha moment, or that speech therapist that aha moment. Now I can have an interactive reading experience with the student who switches throughout the book and they can participate in the retelling. So that's one thing we've been doing recently too.
Oh, I love that so much. Yeah. I mean, because again, we talk about this in the class that we've taught, which is just going beyond just hitting the
Yeah.
switch, right?
Mm-hmm.
How can we make it more dynamic? What else can we add to it? When we talk about our mini episodes this season and in the past, we talk about implementation. And so we've started adding implementation sheets with some of these resources that you guys might see in the Instructional Resource Center here at SSD. And just thinking about how we can build capacity for communication partners to take the onus and the work off of them to try to use all of these things and generate communication opportunities and generate reading opportunities. So I love that. You guys have a centralized resource where you're keeping track of those?
Yeah. So we did book bins, so we put like a symbol of like the Switch toy on the outside, and then we put the books in them so they come all together. We were lucky enough that after Adapted Toy Wonderland we had about probably 200 Switch toys left over. We
Mm.
had some community help this year through a corporation, so what we ended up doing was just bundling Switch toys. So instead of checking out the Trolls guitar. You got the Trolls guitar with the makeup vanity that lights up. We tried to put more Switch toys together too, which I think is important because you would hate for a student just to have the dancing monkey all year long. So
I'm into
I know
that.
you hate that. So
I hate the pig the worst. The pig is just the
um
absolute worst because he
or the bunny with red eyes. The
oh
like it's like
yeah.
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 And
The oh, I'm gonna date myself, but he just
yeah.
reminds me of Mogwai. What's the
Oh,
Gremlins? He
Mowgli?
reminds me of
Oh,
Gremlins.
oh,
Yeah,
oh.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
The bunny,
So
the Gremlin
anyway.
bunny. Gremlin bunny. Okay. Well, I think we'll just end there, Mary Catherine. I really appreciate you jumping on today. I feel like there's so much more to learn from you, but this is a snapshot. If someone wants to learn more or wants to reach out with a question, what is the best way to follow you? And oh, we didn't even talk about your new website. Let's talk about that.
Oh, well, it's just marykatherine.dally.com. So there are links to my Instagram, and you can contact me if you want more information or if you heard something on here today and you're like, oh, what is that resource? And then my Instagram is AAC for all. So those are just ways to connect.
Yeah. And I know you're starting a blog that's going to be linked on your website too, which is going to have lots
Yes.
of great resources. So definitely give her a follow and follow for more info on the blog that's coming and accessibility for just all kind and lots of ideas because you're just full of them.
Well, I thanks for having me on today. I appreciate it. I'm
Yeah.
not a big pod. I love listening to podcasts. I don't love doing podcasts. So, St. Louis, you have a special place in my heart now.
Yes. Okay. Well, we want to say a special thanks to Mary Catherine for being on Innovative AAC Solutions, and we'll check you next time.